I hate the way you talk to me and the way you cut your hair. I hate the way you drive my car. I hate it when you stare. I hate your big dumb combat boots and the way you read my mind. I hate you so much it makes me sick. It even makes me rhyme.
Katarina Stratford is complicated. She's also one of the most original characters in the history of the teen film genre. The year was 1999 and the new millennium came a-calling. Indie films were getting bigger and the original concepts were finally getting decent exposure from the public. But before reining in those doomed triple zeros, the studio executives wanted to part ways with the youngins of yesterday with one last hurrah, and thus came the film 10 Things I Hate About You. Written by Karen McCullough Lutz and Kirsten Smith and based on the infamous Shakespearean play The Taming of the Shrew, a brand new audience was introduced to one of the most uncommon tropes that had yet to be fully dissected in modern media, the anti-queen bee. In the most cheesy sense of a description, this would typically consist of an unpopular student that goes against the status quo that's normally built and maintained by the most popular girl, aka the queen bee. And despite not knowing much about her, we know that she's mean and vicious towards her unworthy peers because they don't eat at their designated lunch tables, or they make eye contact with her for too long, or they wear the ugliest effing skirt she's ever seen on school grounds, and the loner reject loner loser unpopular spends the whole movie taking her down a notch and loses herself in the process. Rinse and repeat, 5 stars, no stars, we know that story all too well. But as the writers drew inspiration from the likes of My So-Called Life, Clueless, 16 Candles, and other teen dramas at the time, it helped shape the script they had in mind. The essence of popularity was something that was seen as somewhat of a holy grail in the media's depiction of high school, and many characters were often written to be willing to do just about anything to obtain it. But what if we were given a story about a girl who already held that status and decided to walk away from it instead? Katarina, or Kat, Stratford plays the part of both stereotypes in one, which ended up creating a very honest portrayal of a modernized teenager. So much so that she's still remembered and praised today for being such a self-imposed light in a very oversaturated genre. Growing up, I watched 10 Things quite a bit in passing, but it wasn't the one that we all know and love. It was actually the series reboot that aired on ABC Family circa 2009. And I know people probably hated it, but if you consider the budget and the soon-to-be iconic acting chops of Tess Tear It Down Tyler from Camp Rock and Camp Rock 2, and Psycho Swim Bob of Pretty Little Liars, and completely forget about the movie it's connected to, it was actually a very fun premise. But now that I'm in my 20s, I've recently had the opportunity of rewatching the movie all over again, and this time around I was able to pay more attention to Kat's character arc, as well as how it's aged over time. And although there's been quite a few wisecracks about her character's demeanor throughout the years, I think it's safe to say that if it weren't for the execution of Kat Stratford being somewhat of a sacrificial lamb for what could be deemed as a strong female lead once upon a time, we would be in much worse shape for characters written by women for women today. So, lover or hater, let's take a closer look at what makes Katarina Stratford so complex. The 90s teen film boom was an era that brought a lot of female-centric stories to the forefront and sparked a lot of controversies involving topics that focused more on realism and young adults. These stories range from strong friendships to melodramatics, upper class to lower, and finally challenging the status quo on femininity. In Taming of the Shrew, Katarina is portrayed as a grotesque and sharp-tongued maiden who is feared throughout the city of Padua, and does not wish to marry, even though it is expected of her, especially as an older woman throughout the story. The origins of her unhappiness are not exactly addressed, but there have been theories that have alluded to her being resentful towards her rich, passive father, Baptista Manola, who sees her needs as a burden and wants nothing more than to wed her to the highest bidder. She also holds very faint patience with the townsmen due to the constant badgering from them in hopes of winning the hand of Bianca Stratford, her younger sister, for marriage. But after reading the play myself, I think there's definitely more to Kat's story than meets the eye. Since this is more of a contemporary take, the setting moves in the direction of a hugely exaggerated portrayal of the social hierarchy that high school has to offer, and that is where we, as an audience, are able to get more insight on Kat's reputation amongst her peers. And I think that's why her introduction on screen is still so excellent, even if you've never seen the movie fully. When a group of presumably popular girls are happily cruising down the road, accompanied by an upbeat, trendy 90s tune, you'd think you're about to get spoon-fed yet another story that pokes fun at the consistently underwritten high school experience. But instead, we're given a misdirect and are introduced to the unexpected real main character, scowling at her peers in her 1960s red Dodge, while simultaneously playing the song Bad Reputation by Joan Jett and the Blackhearts. Looking at that scene through my Gen Z state of mind, it makes a lot of sense as to why it could barely beat the "she's not like the other girls" allegations, but taking the time period in consideration, it feels like more of a statement to the higher-ups in charge of these big productions that Katarina Stratford is a girl that can exist, and she can be a leading character, and you're not gonna have her figured out just yet, and that is okay. While the misadventures of this tale originally take place in northern Italy and is described as the nursery of the arts, we are taken back and forth through the animated building that embodies Padua High School and its students. We're introduced to various friend groups throughout the building, all amplified in their own ways, but just like the original text, there is a clear focus on the male's point of view. We see this especially during the classroom scenes. When students are given English and literature subjects in film, it's usually the simplest way to present foreshadowing, as well as getting more insight of a character's thoughts through another character's thoughts, from a well-known story that the audience is most likely familiar with. But in this case, I see it more as a battlefield for Kat. Throughout the movie, she constantly finds ways to challenge others into having more nuanced opinions, but isn't exactly heard in the process. In addition, it's also something to circle back to whenever a change in her arc happens during the course of the movie. Her actions, in a way, are performed in a stage-like manner, for her male peers to dissect her characterization and whether to applaud or criticize it. But even then, her thoughts are usually minimized, seeing as she's accused of being mentally unstable or having her time of the month by her male classmates, showcasing their lack of concern for her opinions in general, but especially if it isn't pleasing to her male peers. And while the class does consist of other girls besides Kat, it isn't lost on the audience that the only time another girl actually does speak is when she's complimenting a man's words, who just so happen to be from Ernest Hemingway in the first classroom scene. And in cat-like fashion, she disapproves, reminding her that Hemingway in particular was a drunken misogynist who most likely wouldn't respect her as a woman, and pushes for the class to explore more works by women, such as Sylvia Plath or Charlotte Bronte. And while the class does consist of other girls besides Kat, it isn't lost on the audience that the only time another girl actually does speak is when she's complimenting a man's words, who just so happen to be from Ernest Hemingway in the first classroom scene. And maybe that was considered nitpicky and radical at the time, but in today's standards, that's just a regular Twitter interaction to me, so who am I to say whether or not it was really considered annoying? I personally used to love when students passed the time by asking questions because I sure wasn't going to. Knowledge overall is a real strong suit for Kat, and a learning space is where she tends to thrive. And while others may find her to be snarky or pretentious, the one thing you can't say is that she's wrong. The 90s wave of feminism brought in the rise of the Riot Grrrl era, which was highly criticized for its message and overall influence on young women who pushed for progressiveness and challenged the system. This also showcased Kat to be more of a tough love kind of girl, which could have played a huge part in her assertiveness for women to remember to be their own person and to make their own choices without social influence. And while I do respect that aspect and sense of self-awareness in her, most girls will unfortunately not be able to find that peace of mind so early, especially in the middle of high school. It's a journey for everyone, and the path may not always be so easy. I can recall being that friend in high school that had no problem listening to stories from my friends that revolved around dating, self-esteem issues, and how crazy it was that life was just beginning and it already felt like a total train wreck. And although it would have been easy to just tell them to toughen up or stop caring so much about the small things, it also would have made me really hard to be around, also incredibly friendless in record time. The abandonment of Kat's mother was never mentioned in the Shakespearean play, but it was, however, used for this adaptation. While attempting to pinpoint the origin of Katarina's shift in attitude, it was written that the mother of the Stratfords walked out on the family, which prompted Kat's rebellious nature. Now I have to add that this plot device was only used for the sake of making the movie executives happy, due to them apparently really itching for a reason to account for Kat's constant agitation for others. According to Smith and McCullough, they were given a note on behalf of Kat's character that simply asked, "Why is she so angry?" and the abandoned mother scenario was born. So in this case, I will refrain from that factor because it just doesn't seem fair to really consider it too much. I'm looking at this from the framing of a character that is written to be a typical teenager who has certain gripes with the world, which is understandable enough for me. So, what is the deal with Kat's views on women? Although they were pretty scarce in the play, as well as in the motion picture, the best way to redirect it is to look at the dynamic between her and her sister Bianca. Representing a sense of innocence and perfection all in one archetype of hyper-femininity, we see that one of the main things Bianca strives for is likability amongst her peers, and as we know, Kat is the exact opposite. But we as an audience are aware that Kat has no desire for that because she's already been in that boat of popularity, and it's not all it's cracked up to be for her. When Bianca and Kat finally have a heart-to-heart, she reveals that she once dated star athlete Joey Donner, whom Bianca currently has a crush on. And the animosity she holds towards him goes back to them going all the way due to peer pressure, and him breaking up with her because she no longer felt comfortable doing it again. And not only did this change her view of him, she was also shunned by her former friend group for daring to draw such a line with the most popular guy in school. And seeing how badly a lot of women were penalized in the media for these types of situations, especially at that time period, I can only imagine the kinds of rumors about her that would have traveled throughout the school had she not been able to threaten Joey to keep quiet about her. We can only assume the straying friends are the ones we see in the beginning of the film, because we never actually get to see any designated queen bees in this movie. But since Kat is still the talk of the town and has made quite the name for herself, there's a strong possibility she still strangely holds the title. Until all eyes are on Bianca, a new and improved Stratford sister that Joey wants and has the worst of intentions for. So while Kat's portrayal of protectiveness may have been seen as judgment from Bianca's viewpoint, she still creates a boundary of letting her make her own decisions, even if that means possibly falling for a guy like Joey. But what she does make clear is to do the things you want to do because you want to. While we don't know much about what consisted of Katerina's previous reputation as a former popular, we do know that Bianca's casual nature reminds her of a time where she wishes she used more discernment, so she just wants to make sure Bianca can wise up and see the red flags of situations earlier than she did, hence the assertive nature with her female peers. Katerina's main gripe with traditionalism, Bianca, and girls like Bianca is the unsettling fear of peer pressure that can go along with the societal state of affairs. Does Bianca want pearls because she likes them or because she thinks other people would? Is prom still around due to choice or expectation? And can one have honest relationships in life if they're operating on the basis of social hierarchy in the back of their minds? In the final act of Taming, we are given a long-awaited monologue by Katerina, publicly showcasing her new stances on the duties of a woman in Shakespearean society. In this speech, she champions her husband, Petruchio, and declares that the true makings of a woman should include obedience, looking your best, and loving your fellow hardworking man unconditionally. And with that, she is finally tamed. Throughout the years, many people have tried to theorize the intentions of this speech, and whether or not it's an authentic message from the heart, or a tongue-in-cheek slight at the patriarchy, as she sometimes adds a clever wink to the audience in modern stage plays. But given the time it was made, I can't exactly say that there's much room for that interpretation for me, but I guess there's no harm in considering it. But in this take on Kat's speech, which is also the most famous scene from the movie, she volunteers to read a poem she's written about Petruchio, aka Patrick Verona, in front of the class. In the beginning, she awkwardly reads aloud the things she hates about him, cherry-picking small details about him that only she'd notice, and ends it fighting back tears while running out of the classroom. Now, as most people know, she originally wasn't supposed to appear that vulnerable in this scene, but Julia Stiles, the actress portraying Kat, felt overwhelmed reciting it to the point where she really did cry. And since it did leave her class stunned, or maybe slightly uncomfortable, it made a lot of sense for that to be the chosen expression. Playing out the scene in an awkward and slightly irritated way would have done just fine, as it most likely was written that way in the script. But one of the main things her peers had never seen was Kat's ability to publicly put her feelings out there without feeling guarded. At this point in time, she'd not only been seen as appalling by most of the school, was socially abandoned by her former friends, and was used as a bet by the one guy she actually trusted. It would make a lot of sense for her to continue being mad at the world. But for the first time, she shows that she's legitimately hurt because she lost someone that actually mattered to her, and in that moment, she's human. There have been discussions about who would actually be considered tamed in this version of the story, jumping from Patrick finally learning not to judge a book by its cover, or Katarina doing the same. But if I'm being honest, Kat was still very much ahead of the game in more ways than one. She was aware of a lot of the immaturity her peers possessed. She made sure that her sister was more aware as well. She called out the funny business of the proposal the minute she was asked to go to prom, and if this were any other story, she'd rightfully be called insecure. But she was actually right about pretty much everything. So was she ever actually tamed, or was she just willing to find balance within her comfort zone for the people she actually cared about? Because of characters like Kat, there has been a drastic difference in the portrayal of feminism on screen in recent years. Though there is still a never-ending push and pull to these discussions, the depiction of feminism is seen as less taboo of a concept, and more as a rite of passage in coming-of-age stories that center around girlhood. The topic will be incredibly scattered, and will bring in a lot of interpretations from varied audiences, but nevertheless, it is a step in the right direction. All in all, it's important to understand that the image of the perfect feminist does not and will not ever exist, on screen or off. But the legacies they leave can make a long-lasting impression. The character of Kat feels like a time capsule of some sort, scarily mirroring a chapter in a young girl's life that isn't pretty nor ugly, but just very humane. She's timeless, she's unapologetic, she's opinionated, she's perceptive, she's honest, she's complicated, and she'll be just fine.